So, Harlan Ellison, he was born on May of 1934 in Cleveland, Ohio. He's no longer with us. He passed away in 2018, so relatively recently. His mother was a dentist and his father was a jeweler, so they were doing fairly well financially. He was Jewish. He was really scrawny. As an adult, he even only grew to be 5'5". And the way he tells it, he was bullied relentlessly as a child, often getting into fights. There's a documentary that I watched called Dreams with Sharp Teeth. It was free on Tubi, one of the freemium streaming services. I recommend you watch it if you are interested after everything we tell you here, because it's fascinating. But in the documentary, there's a picture of him at school standing with his class. And indeed, he's the smallest in the lineup, shortest one there. And in the picture, he and another boy both have like bandages on their face. And he claims that it was from a fight that they had before the photo was taken. Later in life, Harlan would often use the names of his childhood bullies as villains in his stories.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
That's good.
So if you think that's good, just wait. Defining characteristic of some of his fiction. When his father was 14, his father died suddenly, and Harlan was in the room, the way he tells it. There's conflicting accounts of exactly why his father died. The documentary says something else, but my sister helped me look up through Ancestry to find the obit in the Plainsville Telegraph, and it says it was a heart attack. So really traumatic event.
You really do your research, by the way. That's amazing.
Well, so I get really something that happens aside when you're doing research on people who are famous but are not the subject of lots of historical scholarship, is that they often are their own narrator. So when we're talking about Jerry Robinson, the significant majority of what we know about him is what he said about himself. When we talk about Bob Kane, the significant majority of what we know about him is what he said about himself. And I love the Harlan Ellison documentary, but a significant portion of what he says in it is what he said about himself. And there are people who are really, really good self-promoters. And so I start to...
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've talked about this on the podcast before, that Bob Kane just like lied a lot about how great he was, right? Like, so the unreliable narrators, absolutely.
Yeah. So when it comes to something like that's so defining, that sounds fantastic, I tend to want to look for corroboration. And so I really tried to dig on this story. I don't know why, but I did. Couldn't find any real detail other than what the obit said in the newspaper. Anyway, because of this trauma, he would run away frequently as a teenager. The way he tells the story, he would end up several states away, doing a fishing job, doing logging, right? And then somehow ends up coming back home and continuing to go to school, right? So he would go away for a few months, have a job, be an adult while he's like 15 or whatever, and then go back to school. After high school, he got into Ohio State University. So in 1951, he started going to Ohio State University. But in 1953, he was expelled. Yeah.
Is it for fighting?
Well, so the way that he tells the story in the documentary, an English professor told him that he had no talent and that he should go find a job, that he was wasting his time at school. And so Harlan punched the professor and got expelled. Yeah. That's the way he tells the story. Other people say that it was just a verbal altercation. But whatever the case, right, he ended up fighting with a professor who told him he couldn't write.
Oh, man.
And for a great many years afterwards, Harlan would supposedly send this professor every single story or published work that he had written in the mail. So he would get an article published, he'd send it to the professor. He'd get a book published, he'd send it to the professor. Short story. He says,
so he holds grudges. Obviously, he names his villains after his past bullies, and he just continually like berates, almost terrorizes this old English professor with all this mail.
And he's got like flowery language where he describes like he hopes that this professor every day comes home to his house and like pouring out of every nook and cranny and bookcase and under every floorboard there's another piece of Harlan Ellison's writing, so he can't escape it, right? He takes great joy in the revenge.
Man.
In 1955,
kind of feel sad for him to have like so much pent up anger and aggression and energy pointed in this direction. Like, ugh.
We're just finishing page 1.
I know. Like I see where this. He just was expelled from college. He hasn't even gone into his like professional life yet.
Yeah, we're getting there. In 1955, after getting expelled, he moves to New York City to pursue writing freelance. Here, he experienced pretty significant success. And between 1955 and 1957, he has over 100 works published, short stories, articles that appear in pulps or magazines, even a couple comic book scripts. And he doesn't sort of reach the higher level of notoriety where he becomes a fixture just yet, but he's selling works and getting published. In 1957, he gets drafted into the Army, draft was still active at that time. This was after the Korean War, during the Vietnam War, but before America has officially entered the Vietnam War. We don't have boots on the ground. So we're not actively participating in anything. So he was never deployed, but he trained at Fort Benning in Georgia. And supposedly he brought his typewriter with him to basic training, and he would hide away in a bathroom. He'd go all the way to the end of the hall in the bathroom to the last stall. He'd put a board across his lap and put, the typewriter on top, and he'd be working on writing his first novel, which was called Web of the City. And apparently the way he got by, not being, to not get bullied and to, fit in and to like reduce his workload and things like that, is that he would write love letters for the other GIs to send back to their girlfriends, right? And he'd do that in trade for like getting out of a duty, or like, maybe they have some sort of supplies or things like that he would want. Again, this is a story that he tells, but I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's kind of crazy too, like because like he's in the Army during in one of the like rare peace times in the U.S. So he doesn't actually have fear for his life, and he's just at Fort Benning, like you said, and I thought that was like a very like rigorous and tiring experience, but apparently he has endless energy such that he hides in the bathroom and like types letters for people. Like that's kind of insane.
Yeah. After a long day of like basic training, everyone's going, they're just dropping, dead, going to sleep. And he's like writing all night long.
Yeah. My day's getting started. That's how I feel about Alfred also. Like that was something I thought when at like 4 a.m. in the comic when Batman's
he's like
back.
Tea. Yeah.
And Alfred's up. And it's like, when does this guy sleep? Because he works the house during the day when Bruce Wayne sleeps.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so after his time at Fort Benning doing basic training, he spent a little bit of time working at Fort Knox, which I thought was kind of a cool factoid. And in 1959, so after just a few years, he leaves in what they called mutual consent in the documentary. I don't know what that means. I think that means he wasn't kicked out. I couldn't find, any sort of record or anything about how exactly he left the Army. No one talked about like him getting into a fight or getting, anything like that. But people did say that he didn't like it, and that it didn't agree with him. After his time in the Army, Ellison moved to LA instead of New York. He would live there for the rest of his life. He loved Los Angeles and talked about it often. And this is the period of time where Harlan really started to become a character and a fixture in the science fiction community. We started to become famous. He would often arrange to go to local bookshops and set up his typewriter and work in the window. So he would be writing while people were walking by and they could watch him, do his work. And this was also the period of time where he got into script writing. He co-wrote the script for a 1966 movie called The Oscar that flopped, didn't do well at the box office, but did see success in writing many episodes of television shows. The Outer Limits, The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Logan's Run. Many years later, he wrote several episodes of Babylon 5 and was a story consultant with J. Michael.
Those are pretty big
on that show. Yeah. Perhaps most famous. The most famous episode of television he ever wrote was a script for Star Trek. The episode was called The City on the Edge of Forever. And this is a really quintessential episode of Star Trek, the original series. It's really good. Steve Shives, who we had on as a guest on a previous episode of the show, does an excellent video on this script. So I'm going to give you like the 2-minute like Cliff Notes version. He goes in depth for like 20 minutes. If you're interested, you should go watch his video. I'll leave a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I will.
Suffice to say that this is considered by many the best single episode of the original Star Trek series. And Steve includes it in his list, his short list of best first episodes to watch for anyone getting into Star Trek broadly. Like they don't know if they want to watch The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, or, he says this is one of the episodes you got to watch to see if you're going to be into Star Trek or not. Even as it's so widely acclaimed as being one of the best episodes of Star Trek, Ellison hates it. He's on the record as despising this episode of the television show. And the reason is that they ended up making significant changes to his script after it was delivered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. At first, they were asking him to make changes, and he was on board. He was like modifying the script. right? Eventually, it deviated too far, and he just left the project altogether, even going so far as like not wanting his name on the show, but they put it on it anyway. Some of the changes, if you're trying to like be an impartial external observer, are just because Gene Roddenberry didn't like certain things. For example, in Harlan's draft of the script, a crew member at the beginning of the episode is like dealing drugs, and someone ends up taking it and has a bad reaction, right? In the final treatment, what they shot, it's like medicine, like someone accidentally injects themselves from something from, the doctor. But most of the changes can probably be chalked up to budget. Like Gene Roddenberry's on record of saying like, we had like $50,000 to shoot the show, and the way Harlan wrote it, it was like going to cost us $350,000 or whatever. There's just like lots of special effects, lots of, very expensive to shoot. And Harlan, if you can guess, I don't know if you've got the vibe on him.
Oh, I think so, but go ahead.
He holds a huge grudge about this for years.
Probably until he died. He seems like a guy who like holds on to stuff for his whole life. Yeah.
Yes. So, but what you were saying, he's willing to burn it all down, right? He's kind of a firebrand. I can't talk about Harlan without talking about his controversies. So we should just run down some of the things that he did that people aren't so fond of. There's a lot, so I'll try to get through it fast.
I'm looking at this list. I'm wondering if there are any of these that we should say allegedly for, or if they're all like proven.
Well, he's dead now, so I don't, unless his estate's going to come after us, I don't know.
Fair enough.
He was married 5 times, which I think is just an interesting, note. That's an accomplishment for many people.
I outlived them all. That's a joke. Never mind.
He was incredibly litigious. He was known for suing other creators, other companies. For example, he sued ABC because of a TV show called Future Cop that he said it was based on his short story called Brillo. He won that case in court, and ABC ended up paying him lots of money. He sued James Cameron because The Terminator, he said, was based on a short story that he wrote called Soldier. He settled with James Cameron out of court.
So that means he won.
That James Cameron paid him money, yes.
Yes. Wow.
A judge or jury did not adjudicate that.
Well, yeah, but whenever it's settled, money changed hands because
yes.
That was cheaper than actually doing the fight, which probably means, in most cases, that's kind of taken to mean it was an accurate claim.
Yes. Yeah. And they're saving face. Yes.
Yeah.
He sued AOL in the year 2000 over one of his short stories being published on a Usenet news group that AOL did not run, but they did index it. So you could search something on AOL, find it on Usenet, read one of his stories for free. He settled. So AOL.
No way.
Yes.
So AOL settled because they provided access to something.
Yes. Which
way.
Post DMCA is insane. Like the internet does not work that way. There's like all kinds of safe harbor provisions and stuff like that. But this is the Wild West. Like this is, I don't know.
I mean, this is when precedent is being set.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
He sued Paramount and CBS over merchandise that are derivative of the City of Forever. His story. They settled, so they ended up paying him for stories and merchandise and things that were derivative. Right. He sued Justin Timberlake in 2011 over a movie that he was in. I don't know if you remember when JT was trying to become an actor.
I do, yeah.
There was a movie called In Time. He said it was based on one of his short stories. That one ended up getting dropped. He dropped the lawsuit. Didn't settle on that one. Didn't go to court. He sued this one's wild. He sued a book publisher called Fantagraphics for defamation over, I kid you not, them using quotations he provided for that book. Right? It was a comic book history book. He provided quotes for the book. They used his exact quotes in the book. He sued them for defamation. And they settled. Yeah.
I'm bewildered by that. I was so curious how they could use his own quotations that he provided for the book to defame himself, to say that they are defaming.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I would, for another time, but I'd love to drill into that one. That one sounds really interesting.
To be fair, I didn't research that one very deeply, so cover my ass here. It's possible
that's fine.
that's a mischaracterization of what happened, but
I'm just reading the words here that he said things that they took and he sued them because those things defamed himself.
Yes.
Right? Like
that's what I'm understanding. Yeah. So yeah, lawsuits, marriages, those are the sort of lighter ones. It gets heavier. There's various assaults and altercations that he was in. There stories about him, punching TV executives and stuff like that. In one case, there was another author that was nominated for an award, and there was a lot of controversy, and he ended up writing an essay that was being a vocal defender. That person was accused of sexual assault of a minor, and he was like defending that person. Yeah. There's another sort of, probably the most famous case was that he was given an award at like a banquet setting. He came up on stage, and the presenter, he had an interaction with that presenter, and he ended up groping her on stage, like in front of all these people.
Whoa.
Yeah. And like it's on video, so you can see this online. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not great. I highly recommend a YouTube video. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's called Harlan Ellison, the Bad Boy of Science Fiction. Should he be canceled? It's done by Daisy Ex Machina, who is a drag queen who does book reviews, and they are fantastic. Really good, balanced look at Harlan from a moral and ethical perspective. I'm always more comfortable talking about these sorts of things when someone is dead, because I don't feel like I'm sending clout their way if they're complicated people. And needless to say, people are complicated. In addition to all these controversies, there were lots of things that I view as quite good. He was vocal in being against the Vietnam War. He was vocally supportive of the Equal Rights Amendment. He marched in the second and third Selma marches with Martin Luther King Jr. Yeah, in Alabama.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He's vocally pro-labor, and he served for an extended period of time on the board of the Writers Guild of America. So like very socially progressive, on the right side of history on a lot of things. Also a troubled dude, right? So take that as you will. I think it's very much possible to appreciate someone's place in history and their fiction while still understanding sort of the caveats that come along with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of, if you read a lot of biographies, you'll discover that a lot of the great people in the world were kind of like terrible at the micro level.
Right.
Like they have issues with their families, their spouses, or whatever, but are on the right side of history for focusing on like humanity at large.
Right.
So this sounds kind of in that vein where it's kind of like the forest for the trees a little bit, much more focus on the forest.